Hi everyone, this is Ahir, your host, and today we're not here for demonizing periods. Okay, so welcome everyone to our second episode of Not Here For, a podcast series based in Dhaka, Bangladesh, where we explore and discuss one thing we're not here for with our young and passionate perspectives. And as the title says, today we're talking about periods, period shaming. So last month, 28th of May, it was Menstrual Hygiene Hell Day, and that is why to kind of remember that we wanted to start conversations on periods and period stigma and just basically explore stigma, the historical context of it, and how it relates to our lives and how we deal with the impacts of it every day in our schools, homes, workplaces, everywhere. So yeah, that's it. This is actually going to be a two-part episode. This is the first part where we will be talking about the micro level consequences that we ourselves deal with. So, a lot of personal experiences and everything. And today, joining me, we have Sharose Islam from North South University. Sharose, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hi, Ahir. Thank you so much. Um, I'm Sharose Islam. I study at NSU. I'm majoring in marketing and HR. And when Ahir reached out to me about this, I was like, this is the perfect thing to talk about right now, given that ever since I joined university, I've been meeting different kinds of people, right? And it's been extremely enlightening to see, in the worst way possible, how the conversation around periods is still a stigma in our society in 2020. Like I joined NSU in the towards the end of 2017, and I thought that, you know what, we're all adults, we can talk about things now, it doesn't matter anymore. But it doesn't. It does. And it's just so disheartening to see how, even in this day and age, we are so ashamed, I guess, to talk about something that is extremely natural. And even when I was in school, I would have to, during my days at school, I was schooled about how I should not be talking so openly about something that is so shameful, or this is like a girl's secret, so you shouldn't be so vocal about it. What kind of a girl are you? What kind of family do you belong to? Why do you talk about these things? So I'm just like, I mean, I'm an educated girl from an educated family, FYI, which is why I don't have a problem talking about these things so openly, right? So, yeah, it's good to see that the youth is actually taking this to a bigger platform, because this is reaching out to more people. And yeah, I'm just glad to be a part of a conversation on such a huge platform where I can reach out to more people about something I've been wanting to spread awareness about for a really long time.
That's great. I love that. I feel like regardless of us being from educated families, it's just a topic that everyone should be talking about. Like,
Definitely.
um,
I have this thing
yeah.
where I differentiate between educated and literate. So all of us are literate, but none of us are educated until and
Oh my
unless
God.
we talk about things that matter, you know? So that's what I mean when I say educated. It's not just about, whether you have a high school degree or not. It's about what's in here on like
Yeah,
a bigger level.
totally. I get what you mean. I think the fact that we really need to do an episode on this, and
Definitely.
especially targeting stigma. And even though I feel like stigma is recently being talked about a lot, but it's just these really ground level remarks like, oh, একটা কাগজ পেঁচে নিতে হয়. Like, stigma actually cuts through way more layers, and I thought that's why we really need to target this particular angle, especially when I saw so a lot of companies like Sinora and UNICEF, they were putting out awareness posts because 28th May was health menstrual hygiene day, and oh my god, all of the comments, literally, not I didn't find a single positive comment. All of the comments were just like, why are you talking about this, মানে বুঝছি, this is বুঝছি যে এটা
আর
একটা
কত এটা
জিনিস,
নিয়ে কথা
কিন্তু
বলবা? Yeah,
কিন্তু পাবলিকে কেন কথা বলতে হবে, পাবলিকে কেন কথা বলতে হবে, কেন like, it
exactly.
was just, the comment section was just filled with Bengali brown angry men like, কেন রে কথা বলছো, কেন, what, their mind was blown. It was just, it is such a natural process And the fact that our society reacts so violently to that is just
exactly. And this thing যে আচ্ছা বুঝছি তো এত কেন বলতে হবে কেন না বললে সমস্যাটা
এতই
কি
বলতে হবে।
I mean, if we are going through it, if we are experiencing it every single month, give or take, why can't we talk about it? Why do we have to be ashamed about talking about it? If you suppose if you have a headache and you keep telling and you tell people, oh God, I have a headache, and then they're not like, "Ar koibar bolbo, buchhi to headache ase, eto bolar ki ache." So this is even more natural than a headache. This is something that happens to most women, right? So I don't understand why it's deemed to be such a shameful thing when there are
Yeah,
things
we'll
which are
get there.
way more
We'll get
shameful that we
how
talk
this
about.
shame came to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think to start off the episode, I just wrote down a very chop kind of definition that I found on the internet just to establish what periods is, because I'm sure many people even now believe a lot of weird myths about periods and everything. Just so period or menstruation is a process in which the uterus, which is an organ in the lower body of someone who's biologically female, so this organ sheds blood and tissue through the vagina. This is a natural and healthy process for girls and women of reproductive age. It typically lasts 2 to 5 days, and this varies by individual. Note that all women and girls don't have periods, and for many, they're actually highly irregular. So for all of us, our periods are different. Our intensities of how much cramps or pain we suffer from different, and it's even irregular. For example, someone will not have periods for 6 months at all, right? And there are a lot of like a lot of illnesses that come with periods, like PCOS or endometriosis, that makes everyone's experience with periods different. But overall, what I can tell you is that it's a very natural process and nothing to feel shameful about, nothing to be shamed for, and that's it. So I also wrote down definitions of stigma too. I think you saw the definitions that I sent you. These are like,
Yes, I did.
Wrote it in case, since I think it's fair, since we will be talking about these, it's fair to kind of establish a very common definition that we can work with. So stigma is defined as a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person that was prohibited or restricted by social custom. So something that is prohibited or restricted by social custom. Yeah, so I think we know what this is.
We are associating this word with period. It's just sad.
It makes sense. It makes sense. So this stigma is often accompanied by period shaming, the shaming that occurs regarding open conversations about women's bodies. So as Sharose was saying, when you try to talk about it openly, people criticizing you for that, shaming you for that. I wrote down some facts here, Jay. So 1 in 3 say that they often feel uncomfortable using the term vagina around others, and another 62% admits that they felt weird simply using the word period. That's 62%. That's more than half. 73% of our audiences, we carried out a poll on Instagram. So our audience, they claim to have been told not to talk about it or hide it from their male family members. So these are like facts out there for you. And it's something that you see. I mean, we come up with so many nicknames for periods, right? Mashik, pet batha, shorir, kharap. That's just
and even these studies, they're done with such a like limited sample size. If you actually do it on every woman out there, I'm pretty sure the percentage will be much higher. I mean, I don't think I've seen one woman who has been asked to not talk about it or shamed for talking about it. I mean, one of two things have happened to them. 2 of those have happened to me, but at least one of those things have happened to people.
Okay, so to understand how stigma has played out in our lives and how it came to be, I think we need to explore the historical context of it a little bit, like how it came to be and everything. So we have some research here. Sharose, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So to begin with, in 1974, A comparative study of 44 societies found a majority of cultures surveyed viewed menstruation in part as what it is, a signal for a reproductive phase. The study also found that the appearance of taboo in a given society may be closely tied to how much or how little males participate in that society's procreative activities like child rearing and childbirth. That is, higher participation was associated with future taboos, though this relationship does not speak to causation. I don't think, I mean, if there were higher participation, maybe men would understand more, but who knows? There isn't higher participation. I think, just a little comment on this particular data is that, a lot of times we confuse participation with decision making. So I was watching this TED talk on why men should be involved in the conversation because they're not going through it, right? So what she said in that TED talk is that if you're a man, you're definitely in a workplace or educational institute where you're surrounded by women, and women go through it. So if women are menstruating, then you could be co-menstruators, right? I mean, she meant it in a funny way. But the idea is that if you're not involved in the conversation, then how will you understand how your counterpart feels? And it's so important to be empathetic. And if you're not empathetic, you're just creating a hostile environment for everyone, right? So just how it's empathetic for people to when it comes to mental health, it's also important and imperative actually for people to be empathetic when it comes to things like this, which people don't usually talk about but go through. So yeah, maybe higher participation will lead to fewer taboos.
Yeah, plus I feel like when they remain uninformed of what's going on, they're much more likely to reach harmful conclusions and just add to that stigma because it's like shrouded in mystery for them, and they are allowed to kind of make whatever they want of it, and that is why we believe so many menstruation myths and just undermine the entire process of it.
Also, okay, never mind. We go into that later, the decision making part.
Okay, so I think the this participation thing does kind of uh, make sense to me because, well, when you just leave this entire idea to men, they just allowed negative connotations and uh, inclinations to be uh, around this subject. I think our next, something that I found also goes in line with this idea. So in 2000, historian Robert coined the term non-menstrual syndrome or NMS to describe the reproductive envy that led males to stigmatize menstruation and to socially dominate women as psychological compensation for what men cannot do biologically. So adding to this, I think since it is something that didn't happen to men, to kind of alienate the process, they over time they added to this stigma and perpetuated it. Especially because just when you really think of how women's bodies are looked at in societies, how women's sexuality is looked at in society, how a woman's body is always considered vulgar, and all of those negative ideas are just associated with it. I think it was a natural thought process for men to just kind of vilify it because they didn't go through it, and it kind of just a psychological compensation for what men cannot do biologically. Wow, this
Psychological overcompensation. But I feel like it's not just men, I mean, it's just the patriarchy, it's the system.
Definitely,
like there are
definitely.
women I've encountered in line with my encounters, men just don't want to talk about it. They're like, I don't want to be a part of this conversation. But women like who are a product of the patriarchy, like misogynistic women, they'll go like, no, we should not talk about it. This is shameful. Keep it to yourself. Men are not supposed to know about this. So when you're feeding that into a man, suppose I am talking about this with my brother, and my mom comes in and she's like, don't talk to him about this. She hasn't done that, but if she had, then he would have this mentality that, oh, women are supposed to be ashamed of this, so the women who are talking about it are those women. And we all know, like, when we say those women, we're just being like dismissing of anything. I just feel like we have this thing where educated women, as per my definition of educated, are talking about things that matter. Men or misogynistic people in general find it their duty to put them down and dismiss them and shut them off just to feel superior themselves. So that's what I make of this, psychological compensation theory by this historian. It's actually quite interesting. We should look more into it.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I mean, women endorse the system so much. I feel like for most of us girls, the shame comes directly from our mothers or a female teacher or a female friend that like we talked to as a kid. So yeah, when I really think of it collectively, I think it's just women have been passing down generations because, as you said, men just won't talk about it. Like they won't even
Yeah,
mention it. But it's women, our moms, who are like, no, don't hide it from your family members, hide your
mm,
bads. Yeah.
definitely.
Wow.
I have so many little anecdotes related to this. Like, if I start, I'll never end.
That's amazing. We want to hear all of them. So I think a lot of these were developed out of our communities in South Asian countries. The stigma rose around the idea of women's bodies not being sacred during this time. So our
Mm-hmm.
bodies are supposed to be holy, and since periods are deemed dirty, it's the main how stigma manifested in our society, especially, was that periods is just dirty. You can't touch certain things. You can't.
You're
Um,
impure.
yeah, you're impure. You can't. Uh, a lot of things existed. I think I was reading a paper on how in Nepal it plays out. So I was reading about how you can't touch pickles during your periods because then you'll pollute it. Like, yeah,
Oh
so
God, I've
I think a
heard this
lot
so
of it
many times
also
that women on their period
really,
can
I've,
make
I've,
food
I've
impure,
never
and
heard
I'm like,
it.
what? How? It's not just Nepal, it's also an Indian thing. I mean, and I'm pretty sure it's prevalent in Bangladesh as well. We just don't probably, we haven't experienced it, but I'm pretty sure it's there. But also, I feel like,
Yeah, I think,
how people in this continent
yeah,
have this part of the continent have this habit of associating everything with religion. So when, how we can't fast when we're on our periods, so people, I mean, it's said that you are impure when you're on your periods, right? Now, how you interpret it is up to you. But of course, we are misogynistic people always trying to put women down. So our idea of that is that women are demons during their period, so you need to stay away from them. And demons cannot be glorified, so you cannot talk about it. I feel like that's what it is. And especially when you associate religion, like when your religion prohibits you from praying or fasting, the core activities associated to a religion is just, it just adds to it. That of course I think she's impure. You're not allowed to pray when you're on your periods, and I think Hindus are not allowed to participate in pujas or enter temples. I'm not sure about that, but that's what I've heard. And also I've heard that in India, when you're on your period, you're not allowed to enter the kitchen, as I said, because you can make food impure. So these little myths or these little ideologies attached to this entire natural process is what also adds to the entire taboo surrounding it.
definitely. I think in South Asia, especially because our culture and religion is just so related and close together, a lot of factors from our religion and our interpretations of it have influenced
Yeah,
how we view periods and mainly deeming it dirty. Because obviously, period shaming and taboo manifests in a lot of ways. But the idea that especially in our society, it is propagated in such a way that makes our bodies, like that says that our bodies are impure, gives us an inclination of like where it basically came from and how it has been going. So I was reading about Chopadi. It is a practice in the mountainous western Nepal that forces women to sleep and live in sheds for the duration of their period due to the belief that menstruating women cause ill luck to family, crops, and cattle if the god is displeased. So yeah, and this is just an example of that I found from my research to just emphasize on the point that like this is how extreme the case is. This is how extreme the stigma is in our minds, because so this was actually outlawed in 2005 by the Supreme Court, but recently in 2017, so 2017 is like what, last year. So as recently as recent as 2017, this was taken up again because it caused death in huge numbers. Like they are subject to sexual violence, they are subject to the cold, wild animals even, because they have to go and live in like the mountains, and that is horrifying. So since we were talking about the historical context, I thought this is something that I definitely wanted to bring up to just paint a picture of how it has been for our countries, these countries especially.
And this is just the things that we know. There are so many things that we don't know. And when you
Exactly.
do your research into these kinds of practices, like these kinds of ridiculous, absurd practices relating to women's bodies, you'll find such horrifying things. Because I think you know about the it's not related to periods, but you know about the thing that they do in Africa to reduce
Oh my
women's
god.
sexual pleasure, right? So they outlawed
Mutilation?
that as well. Yeah, that. Yeah, so they
Yeah, oh my
outlawed
gosh,
that
yes,
as
no
well.
mutilation.
But I mean, how did these things even exist? So that's my question. Like how do they even, how does one think that, okay, so this woman is bleeding, so now it's time to put her in a jungle or a mountain, so where she's exposed to all these animals. I mean, if we like do some research as to the psychology behind creating such, you know, rituals, I guess, or practices or what, it's just insane to me how people could think that way about something that we have. It's not like we chose to bleed out every month. We're like, okay, God, let's put some, okay, blood, okay, every month. Yeah, nice, perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. And I was actually also
Yeah,
reading
it's
this
something that I
quote.
noticed. Yeah.
Okay, so I was actually also reading this quote. I think you've heard of it as well, how period blood is like the only blood that's not induced by violence, but it's
Yeah.
still the one thing that people refuse to, you know, talk about or accept at all. So yeah, that also says a lot about our mentality as a society.
Definitely. So the thing that you were saying about going into research and everything, that is very relevant. I'd like to bring up the fact that when my team and I at Kotha were researching on this, the historical context of stigma and where basically it came from, the cultures and everything. So while it was kind of okay, so it wasn't easy, but we did find some bits of research here and there from UK and countries abroad. But from South Asian countries, it was so hard to find any form of research. We found a lot of rituals and practices, but where it came from, except for
Mm,
the cultural and religion inclinations, it was really hard to trace back a root. So how,
yeah,
firstly, that just means it is just so deeply rooted in our communities. But secondly, the idea that it is not even something worth researching because it relates to women's bodies. It doesn't have a lot of capital on this particular issue because we're not talking about it. It is not something that
exactly.
attracts a lot of research to be done on it, and that made me so sad because it is something that we should be researching on, like
It's
because
something we don't
the
even
Black Lives
deem
Matter movement
important enough.
is gaining so much
Yeah.
momentum right now. I started looking into colorism.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I started looking into colorism, and I immediately found so much history about how when we were colonized by the British people, or when we were colonized by the Aryans, and how just this mentality came to be. But then I went on to research about how period taboo came to be, because that is also something we deal with so much, and just not a lot, like barely anything, and just yeah, just goes to show
Yeah, same here.
that it is not a subject
I
that consider worthy.
people, yeah, people don't consider it important enough to invest in. That's the thing. So when I was doing my research as well, all I could find were the things that you've already included in that draft. Because there is not much to go on about. I mean, even if you look into like videos or TED Talks, those resources are so limited. Whereas if you want to research on practically anything else, even if you want to research on nail art, you'll find more resources than you do about periods or the stigmas or the originators of these myths or these ridiculous rituals. So yeah, I guess this is a start, or we have to start.
Yeah, hopefully. So this is just apart from the historical context, I think we can now just go a little bit into how the stigma translated into modern times as well, how when media came to be, how it kind of disfigured what periods really is. So I found this really interesting research paper by Elizabeth Armeni. So she released a research paper and a lot of work on period shaming and period taboo. So now that we're going into more modern times, one of the things that that is really dominant and prevalent in the circle and sphere of period that caused period stigma is advertisements. So Elizabeth Armeni argues that advertisement understood well the potential threat menstruation posed to a woman's overall composure, for they knew of the shame society held over this monthly process. And they therefore kind of utilized this shame to present and promote products to the public in that way. So yeah, obviously these advertising strategies developed a deeper layer of taboo and stigmatization, definitely, especially because media is so powerful. Media representation is so powerful. It can just spread a lot of information. It can perpetuate that stigma to such a greater level, and it can spread all of that information. So she basically talks about how this happens because so in the late 20th century, when a lot of these started coming out, ad agencies were run by men who firstly avoided talking about who avoided talking about menstrual products and menstruation in general like the plague, as we were talking about earlier, and secondly did not understand the process. So because
Absolutely.
these advertisements were dealt with by men who had no idea of the process and who themselves had this shame ingrained in them, who themselves were also aware that the market that they were pitching these products to had shame in them, they decided to go further with it. And
I
yeah,
actually want to talk about two things here. First of all, the fact that the most widely used brand of sanitary pads is called Whisper. I
oh my
mean,
god,
why?
I just realized that. Wow, yeah,
Right?
why? Yeah.
It's called Whisper, and then you'll see ads of this other brand called Stay Free, as if periods are supposed to constrict you, or as if controlling the flow is all you need to be free from all the other issues that come with periods. The flow is the least of our problems, it's everything else that comes with it. I mean, it's even the way it's branded, you're just capitalizing on that shame, as you mentioned. It's absolutely, it's insane. It's marketing at its worst and most ethically degraded level. And at the same time, a lot of people will argue that, if why are you so mad about men making those decisions, don't you want men to be a part of the conversation? Now, the thing is, to be a part of the discourse, the reason behind why we want you to be a part of the conversation is that so you can grow empathy. But when you're making decisions, experience outweighs empathy, right? So how can you design a product for a market if you don't even know what that market needs? You're just going off on assumptions of what market needs based on your bias, right? So which is why it's so important that we, make a draw a line over there where we need empathy and where we need experience.
Definitely. The whisper thing just blew my mind. I'm like still recovering from that. Yeah, it's called whisper.
Yeah.
And
And
what's up with the
stay
blue
free.
liquid thing?
Oh, I don't know. Oh my God. Even before I got my own periods, like when I was way younger, of course, I had no education about it. I didn't know what it was. So when they would, show us that blue thing, I just think it's some kind of scientific experiment. Like, how they do ads where they go back to the lab and show you how it's made. I'd be like, oh, that's how they make it. Maybe it's toilet paper for adults.
Oh my
So it's
god,
just
that is
so
such a common
misleading.
assumption. Okay, so for real, before coming to record this, one of my friends just said that for when he was young, for the longest time, he believed that pads were just adult diapers when he would see these advertisements on TV, and just this is such a widespread misconception because you just see these
That's so
like
mad.
cotton
I, as a
stuff.
woman, thought the same.
I don't blame you. They didn't show blood because blood coming out of a vagina is unsavory, like,
Even
or
out
it's
of a tube.
disgusting, or it's disgusting. Like, it's natural. I mean,
You show
they
much more graphic things on TV, okay? I mean, I've seen ads where animals have, like wild animals have been hunted, and I'm just like, you can show that, but you can't show period blood. Are you for real? Like, is violence more, I mean, is violence less gruesome than a natural process? I mean, you wouldn't
no,
even
it
be
is.
here without the natural process. Like, come on.
Yeah, and just yeah, I think these advertisements definitely had a huge role in shaping how we began to view periods because all of these advertisements basically had a very like a very hushed tones about like something fishy was going on, a very like weird tone about it. I mean, I just wrote something here about again Whisper. In
Mm.
2011, they released an ad which was a problem of a teenage girl. So she basically doesn't want to participate in a dance performance because she's on her periods. But they never said that. It during the entire ad, they
It's
never mentioned that
implied.
she just makes this really sad face, and her mom immediately gets it, and then just yeah, that's it. And the entire ad takes place in a room, and there is not one single man. So it's like a room filled with other women and other girls are there, but no man, no male is seen in the video, and it just that's it. And they don't even say periods in the entire duration of the video. So
You just assume. See, this goes on to that, idea where when you're worked up about something or when you're irritable, people are instantly like, are you on your period? Because
oh
you
my
just, from the youngest age, you're just shown that if a girl, if she's nervous or if she's pissed or if she's irritable, then she must be on her period. Like it's as you said, it's not mentioned anywhere, but you just know that this is an advertisement about a sanitary pad, because obviously the girl is hesitating or she's nervous, so yeah, of course she's on her period. What else could it possibly be, right? I mean, I think, yeah, like that's the advertisements play such a huge role in shaping how a society feels about certain things. This is like a prime example of how poor advertising has just stigmatized this natural process even further for the worst.
yeah, definitely. And um I mean, that one example basically showed us, gave us a view into how the trend of how most advertisements are designed regarding periods. And I've seen
Absolutely.
the, like brands like Sonora are actually trying to do something right now, bringing in men to the conversation, but they get so much criticism for it. They get so much backlash for it, like as if they did something so inexplicably wrong and immoral and bad by talking about it. That just, it really gives you an insight to the demographic of brown men and even women. I keep saying brown men, but a lot of it is women.
Just
I don't know. Other than advertisement, of
misogynistic
course,
people.
movies and books, other forms of media. Like, I was reading the book Carrie by Stephen King, and there's also a movie. When she gets her periods, people just start throwing tampons at her and making fun of her. When she gets periods in front of her friends are key. So a lot of, when you look through movies, firstly, if you try to find them in Bollywood movies and Bengali movies, no, periods
It's
doesn't exist.
non-existent.
Nothing.
No
This
periods,
phenomenon
period.
doesn't exist. Yeah. But if like Hollywood to us, but even then it's just all the examples that I found about Carrie. There's one about Carrie, then there's one about in a movie called Only Yesterday. So basically, boys are teasing her about, don't touch her, you'll catch her period. So again, like, that's how period is shown. And I think the third one of like a third reason that we can talk about how in even today's age this shaming is perpetuated is the lack of education and conversations on it because of stigma,
Absolutely.
obviously. But the fact that in schools the chapter on reproductive health is just stapled, it's, or the fact that a proper sex ed, a comprehensive sex ed does not exist to tackle the female reproductive health whatsoever. And yeah, I think this, the fact that schools have no comprehensive education on what the hell a female reproductive system looks like, I think that's a very, very big problem in our
I
society at
mean,
least.
for the longest time, I feel like people just believe that children are dropped at your doorstep in a basket. That's just how it happens. I mean, that's how it works, right? I mean, and the extent to which schools, especially in Bangladesh, are reluctant to talk about such an important issue can be highlighted best with the story that I'd like to share. It's like it was back when I was in school, right? So when I was in school, there was this girl. I think I was in the fourth or fifth grade. I don't clearly remember. So there was this girl, and she had unfortunately stained her trousers with period blood, right? So she was immediately sent home. Like I remember, like it was she was first taken to the infirmary, and then in 10 minutes her parents were here, and she was sent home. And afterwards, what happened just blew my mind, and I still think about it to this day. Like suddenly I'll be like, oh my god, I can't believe that actually happened, and I said nothing. So what happened was our we had a school counselor, so she came into our classroom. So she went to every single classroom, right? So when she came into our classroom, she asked all the boys to leave. So we're like, okay, what the hell is happening, right? So as the boys filed out one by one, if I knew then what I know now, I would have thought that she probably wants to educate us about what periods are or how it happens or what we should do and whatnot. But then I was like confused, like what the hell is happening? So as the boys, filed out, and she locked the door and she made sure no one could hear us. And she told us that we are all now mature women who need to learn how to protect our honor and retain our respect in front of men. And to do that, we need to make sure that when we are on our period, no one around us can tell that we are. If we are in pain, we are to keep it to ourselves. We have to bring extra pads just so that we don't leak and boys don't see us and don't make fun of us. And we should learn how to keep our intimate, private secrets from boys, or else we are not respectable women. And I swear we were all just like, what? What did you just say? And there is nothing we could do about it, because you know how it is in schools. Like the minute you speak up to a teacher, you're like money out of school, or your parents are called upon, and you know how it is, right? So I just feel like now that I'm in a position where I don't have to care about what she says or thinks, I feel like going to her and being like, don't damage people's mentalities like this, like you need to stop. because can you imagine, like, I was lucky enough to know that what she was saying was utter bullshit, but there are girls who come from a patriarchal family. They believed her. They're like, wait, she's right. My honor is associated with my intimate secret, which is my period. And that's how it began, and after that point I decided that no, I'm going to talk about it, not to my superiors, of course, to my friends, to try and normalize the conversation, at least between women, because at that point even talking about periods between women was stigmatized, like, let alone men, let alone people who don't understand what it is, right? So yeah, that's when I heard all of that, কি টাইপের মেয়ে এগুলো, কি কথা বলে, খারাপ মেয়ে, এটা সেটা। I'm just like, you know what, fuck you. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
just,
mean, I think all of us have very similar stories because same thing happened in our school. So I think in class 5, thankfully it didn't happen in my section. I think they just stopped it before it came to my section. But the other section, my section had a pretty young female teacher who seemed fairly open. So I think that's why we got lucky. But the other section wasn't as lucky. The boys were sent off to play games like sports and enjoy
yeah, yeah,
themselves.
yeah.
And the girls were taken into this room and everything was locked, and they were told about how their bodies are changing, something's happening. Just,
Exactly,
I don't
that's
know.
what happened to me as well. The boys were sent off to play handball or something, and we were getting schooled on how to keep a secret.
Yeah, and it just, this secrecy and this segregation between like boys and girls in schools, this is what feeds the secrecy, because now the boys can have toxic locker room banters and just believe
Exactly.
period myths. This is such a huge problem because just, yeah, period myths,
And if you're
it
going to
blows my
encourage us
mind.
to, yeah, it does. I mean, if you want to encourage us to keep our periods a secret, the least you can do is provide us with the necessary things that we need to keep ourselves comfortable. Like, I remember my school, like, I got my period in school once and I didn't have pads on me. I went to the infirmary and they didn't even have pads. And I'm like, what? Like what? You don't have what? And I just couldn't take it. And that same counselor, I told her that you need to get me some, because I'm not good. How the hell am I supposed to go through school? So she's like, so she refused to get me some. She's like, no, we are not authorized to do that. I'm like, what? I had to go to like 3 different people before I could get some pads, which is why, like, when I, like, you asked me about the period dispenser period now pad dispenser thing
Yeah.
at our club room, right? So that's why I was so happy to see that at least things are changing. Like, even if it's slightly changing, they're on their way to changing, because the more we talk about it, the more normalized it becomes. And pads, I hope that one day, like, pads will become like tissue paper. Like, you won't be ashamed to take one and do what you need to do, because it just boggles my mind that it's still so, like, not normalized.
Yeah, I think since now we are kind of moving into the impacts of emotional, physical impacts of how this period stigma played onto our lives, I think we can read out a few of the stories that we got on Instagram, because the story that you said about
Sure.
the stories that we shared about baths at school, I think a lot of girls can relate to it. Like a few days
Absolutely.
back, I heard about how a friend of mine, when she asked for pads, the helper in school got really mad and handed her like a fist of tissue papers and told her to just deal with it.
Just deal
Yeah,
with it.
exactly. Yeah, just, so I'm sure we have a lot of stories like that. Like we have a few
Yeah,
Instagram
we do.
responses. So Sejal Rahman talks about how, so she basically said, we asked Jay, have you ever been shamed by school staff for asking for pads or for asking for these resources? And she said, yes, my doctor at school even made us return pads for compensation.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, when you put a band-aid on someone, do you like ask them to give you a fresh band-aid for compensation? You don't, right?
Now, also, I think
That's just
so. I actually heard the story from a friend, but now this is also on. I can't read it. Apre. So this is also on Instagram. That asked an ayah for a pad, and she shoved tissue paper and cotton into my hand and told me to hide. So it just didn't happen in my school.
no, it's
That's
everywhere.
sad.
It happened to me, it happened to you, and it probably happened to every other girl that we know.
My owner responded that in school I used to have to hide bags inside my copies when going to the bathroom.
Oh my god, I had to do that as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
hiding it
I'm
like
supposed
in
to
your
keep my
pocket or something.
yeah, I need to keep my intimate secrets intact.
Oh my god. Yeah, this is very true. I think this is a very problematic narrative that young girls get. So my younger sister was talking about how when her friends went and asked for pads, the helpers would get really pissed, like actually pissed. Why don't you bring pads? Why are you asking us? So I think it's a very problematic narrative to send out to young girls that their period is a burden or their period is causing
Absolutely.
problem. It's causing inconvenience for others and they should be scolded or berated for it. So I think that idea itself is very messed up because that is not how it is. They should be comforted. They should be because they're probably dealing with cramps right now. They're probably dealing with um, emotions right now that they don't understand. They're dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety because they got periods in their school, which in and of itself is a very scary idea to someone who's young and
Exactly.
getting their periods, like, when they have their periods for the
Hmm.
first few times. So just, yeah, that is very, very problematic.
I think
And
it's
also,
the
I think
fact
a
that
lot of us need to start missing schools and classes when we get our periods, which affect our education and also our mental health a lot. Because again, this is my personal experience. I could never come up with excuses because what do I say? I can't say periods because then my male teacher is going to like get super offended.
এটা কি বলে ফেললো?
Okay. I am someone who personally deals with a lot of issues regarding my periods. So every month there would be a few days where I'd be missing classes because I have horrible cramps. I have a bunch of illnesses associated with my periods that are absolutely horrible and like which make my life hell. So I had to miss a lot of classes, I had to miss a lot of mocks, and I couldn't really say anything because, as I said earlier, like the stigma of it, the shaming of it, I couldn't say it to a male teacher without getting severely berated or called beadob or disrespectful and all of that. So yeah, and it made me feel so guilty about something that is such a natural process and the stress that I felt. Um, I remember one of my friends once just looked at me and said, "I hear you're sick a lot," like with so much disgust. And I think this is something that we really need to talk about. That one of the biggest detrimental consequences of period shaming and period taboo is the fact that we can't talk about it. We can't tell people how we are suffering. So not just limited to cramps and periods in general, it stops women from talking about illnesses. So if I were to talk about my personal experience, for me, ever since period started, my life has been absolutely horrible. So every time I would go to a class, I probably had like a doctor's appointment after the class, and I knew that. And at some point, I also stopped telling even people closest to me. My best friends wouldn't know that I just came from the hospital. I just came after doing an ultrasonogram or like a blood test for something regarding my periods. And it just because realize that the health regarding our periods is just really confusing because even with our gynecologist that shame exists, okay. So that's a
Oh,
problem.
tell me
And
about it.
and a lot of conversations don't existing around periods. So for example, I found out something about my ovaries, and then after 1 year I found out something about my uterus, And then last year, I had like this major breast cancer scare where everyone in my family was like super depressed for a week or two because we thought I was going to die. Because just the diagnosis and the process is so complicated. It's new things keep coming up. And at some point, I realized that even the people closest to me were probably sick of hearing it. And I felt like a burden. And it just, I think that is horrible. So, for example, some of the facts that we had. So, um, yeah, women with symptoms of particular illnesses, more than half, like 54%, said they never sought out medical advice because they thought these symptoms were typical. Like cramps, really bad cramps, and heavy bleeding were part of the natural process. It isn't. And
It's
a
not.
total of 13% were told that they were exaggerating. I have heard that so much. Like, আমার তো কিছু
Same
হয় না, I
here.
barely feel anything at all.
Yeah, exactly. Like, তোমার এত কেন problem? আমার তো কিছু হয় না. Oh, I'll tell you like a story related to my friend. So she was having a lot of trouble with her periods, right? So she would go to gynecologists and try to, figure out what's wrong. One of the doctors diagnosed that she had PCOS without running any tests whatsoever and gave her a verdict যে তুমি আমি একটা কনফারেন্সে যাচ্ছি for like a week এর মধ্যে make a decision. She's like, what decision? She's like, decide if you want to get married or not, because if you get married your PCOS will be cured. And I
Yeah,
thought
I
she
mean,
was
girls have been
kidding,
asked to pray. Just
and she's
girls
like, I am
aren't.
not.
Yeah, and plus they're never given like birth control pills because sex.
Never. Because তুমি তো either married or unmarried.
Oh yeah, exactly. So like gynecologists do this thing where they ask if you're sexually active, like
তুমি কি married?
no bitch, but I'm having like just give it to me. I still want to have sex. It's such a foreign concept to them. It's funny and really sad at the same time.
I mean, if doctors who study in this field are not comfortable enough to talk about it, how do you expect the general public to be?
Yeah. So I think while I would love to go on and just kind of shit on all of the individuals and systems associated with periods and keeping us so like um, keeping us so blind to the different illnesses and the consequences of period stigma. We are at our time limit, so unfortunately. So I think we can just. Oh my god, the internet is gone again.
You're fine now.
Oh, okay. Well, edit this part out where I get super panicked. Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. So just to go over the impacts that we touched upon, firstly, not being able to talk about cramps, the discomfort that we face, and also the very toxic narrative that we get about our periods being an inconvenience, about our periods being a burden, about our periods being dirty, and all of that. And also just the mental health effects on us. Like, oh my God, during periods, the anxiety, the stress, it's insane. And I think a lot of the effects of stigma just add to it because like we already have depression, insomnia, mood swings, fatigue, tension, and anxiety existing when we're on our periods because of the severe hormonal imbalances. But the kind of consequences of period shaming and taboo just adds to it, as we mentioned earlier. And also not addressing a lot of uh, illnesses that lead a lot of women to remain undiagnosed for the rest of their lives. And also girls like me can't really bring up why they're missing classes, girls can't talk about why they're not fasting, why you're feeling under the weather, and we constantly have to come up with excuses. So yeah, feeling very like overwhelmed right now having this conversation because it's something that I've dealt with personally for so long.
Yeah. I just feel like, you know how a few years ago there was a
Hello?
stigma surrounding, like, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go on.
Okay. So I feel like how, you know how a few years ago there was a huge stigma around surrounding mental health issues and how anyone who goes through any sort of mental health problem is crazy. But we talked about it and slowly we realized that if a person is going through something like that, it's not just them. It's everyone around us that needs to contribute to the healing of that person, you know? So when we talk about periods, I feel like we need to fit this topic into that narrative that when a woman goes through her periods, she is experiencing things that are also influenced by external forces. So we have to believe that we are all in this together. So we have to deal with this together. It's not my problem, it's all of our problem. It's not your problem, it's my problem too. So if we grow that empathy towards something that we, first of all, have no say in, and second of all, can't even control, we should definitely, you know, be more, I guess I keep saying empathetic because that's the only word I can think of, you know, because you can't take away my pain, but the least you can do is make me feel comfortable about it. That it's okay that I'm going through this and I don't have to, like, whilst I'm dealing with this pain, I don't have to worry about burdening others. Like, it's not about, it's okay. You know, that's, I feel like that's the goal here, to make women feel like it's okay to go through this and we are not a burden and that it's not something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, I think definitely something that if you watch this far or if you're watching this episode, something that you really need to take away from this is to begin the normalization of the entire process. Educate if you're a guy who doesn't really understand it, educate yourself on it, ask your female friends about it if they're comfortable to answer it, research on it. And if you basically anyone watching this should try and start these conversations in their immediate circles, in their families, in their friends about surrounding periods. So that's all I have to say. Just that's one of the best things that you can do. Starting these conversations, you will be adding a lot
Absolutely.
to the sphere. You will be contributing more than you think. Trust me. So that's I think the main takeaway from this episode. So that's it. You were a great co-host, Sharose. I thoroughly enjoyed all of your anecdotes. I
I
think
did
they brought so
too.
much life to all of the matter that we tackled. And I had a lot of fun talking about
I
periods.
did
It's something that
too.
I can talk about all day.
Same here. If we didn't
Yeah.
have a time limit, we'd go on and on.
Yeah, exactly. For sure. So that's it. Take care,
Yep.
everyone. Bye. Hope you like this episode. We will be coming out with a second episode on periods where we'll be tackling kind of the macro level consequences and how a lot of women are finding hard to access, hard to find access to resources during the pandemic. And we'll be dealing with a lot of those things. So keep an eye out. Um, Take care. Bye. Sharose, do you want to say a bye to our audience?
Bye.
Okay.